Well, the Jazz sure are the talk of the NBA. What does it all mean? Who's right? Who's wrong? And the latest rumors on Lauri Markkanen. It's next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 bum.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Hopefully you're having a great one. On today's show, we will discuss all of the latest rumors. The Jazz are the talk of the NBA, whether it's Bleacher Report, ESPN, podcast, this or that. Everyone is talking Jazz, so we will break down what they are all saying and what is going on from that end of things. We will also take a look at what is being said around. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out why this Leaf did something different on the on our little thing, and it has me all screwed up, I think. Oh, he did. Yeah. Oh, that's kind of cool, though. I kind of like that he did that. I will fix it now, but I give him credit. That was a pretty good little thing. Anyway, for those of you who have no idea, if you're listening on audio, you have no idea what just happened. But my good friend Leaf, who did the show for a few days, had added a little feature, which I liked, but I didn't know existed. And I just saw it for the first time, and it freaked me out. And that was what that was. And so just go with squirrel. Anyway, on today's show, two major NBA podcasts talk about the Utah Jazz, and we'll discuss what they had to say and what it means for the Utah Jazz. What is the latest in all the rumors on Lauri Markkanen? This Adam Silver has big things to say about Ryan Smith. Danny Ainge has changed our mindset about trades. Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report gives a trade idea, and my reaction is that's nowhere near enough for Lauri Markkanen. Is that because Danny Ainge has just completely traded the trade market? Jazz did release Darius Bazley and Kenny Lofton before I went out. We'll touch on that as well, and possibly a few other things as well. It's a jam-packed show, and I'm fired up to be back with you. All right, it is Locked. If you're new to the show, I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube. Please subscribe, follow, hit the bell button on YouTube to be notified, and hit the thumbs up button. We greatly appreciate that. To the everydayers, you're the best. Thank you so much for doing everything you do for this program. You certainly make it great. Or you make the whole network great. All right, let's do it. Today's show, by the way, is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, we got to get right to the news, but I got to tell you a funny. No, that's actually, you don't really care about that. I was going to tell you a funny story about my weekend and me doing something stupid, but then you want to know about Lauri. So let's do that. Tim McMahon says the Jazz are not shopping Lauri, but they're certainly taking offers. Okay, that I think is an interesting concept because truthfully, that's what every team is doing all the time with all of their players. Right? I guess I would say Atlanta shopped Trae Young probably and found there wasn't anything out there. Atlanta might have then shopped DeJounte Murray because they realized they couldn't keep both of them and they got the New Orleans deal done. When there's kind of an impetus that you have to make a deal. The Jazz do not seem to be at a point, and this is important. From all the reports, the Jazz are not of the mindset, it seems, and we'll find out here in now about 8 days, but it does not seem as though the Jazz are in the mindset in any way, shape, or form that we must get into the Cooper Flag, Ace Bailey, French Kid lottery, and therefore we've got to be awful, so therefore we have to trade Lauri. That does not seem to be the case at all. There does seem to be some fan base people that think that that's what they would like, and that's totally fine. Like you may think, and there's a whole conversation about picking a lane. I'm going to do a show on it tomorrow because I think it's an interesting concept. You may be of the ilk that like, no, we need to win 15 games. We need to get into that realm of things, and we need to trade Lauri, not because we need the assets, because actually we truly need to be brutal. Okay. So I think that, that does not seem to be where the Jazz are. Like, I think that's really, really important. All indications from all the latest reports and rumors is that's not where the Jazz are. Now, that could be messaging that they want out there in the final. We're getting into the really tight part of this negotiation. So that was Tim McMahon's report that nowhere, and the Jazz have received nowhere close to what the Jazz want for Lauri. So the Warriors, according to all reports, have not offered either Brandon Podziemski or Jonathan Kuminga. And who knows which of those the Jazz want. One thing that's interesting is everyone's saying, well, you don't want Kuminga because of the money. Like, at some point, we got to pay someone. There is a salary floor in the NBA. So I actually don't think the money on Kuminga or the money on Moody is actually a problem for the Jazz, because at some point, you've got to pay somebody. For the Warriors, it's why I think they should be more than willing to trade them, frankly. Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report said Jazz are prioritizing signing Lauri Markkanen to an extension. So those are kind of the two biggest little news notes that are out there from this last weekend at different reports, is that the Jazz are not shopping Lauri, which vibes, which they are not anywhere close to getting what they want for Lauri if they were to trade Lauri, and that they're prioritizing re-signing Lauri. Okay, so those are the latest rumors, and they all point to kind of the same thing. And that points to the most important conclusion, that the Jazz are not of the mindset that they have to trade Lauri because they have to be terrible to have to move into the bottom 3 or 4 of this draft, or of the records for this draft. Okay, so then you have Brian Windhorst on Hoop Collective with Tim McMahon, who's really good, and Tim Bontemps, who's also really good. But in the case of the Jazz, McMahon's probably as in touch as any reporter in the NBA on the Jazz. There's a lot of times where, as the radio voice of the team and pretty well connected, I find it infuriating when national people talk about the Jazz and all the fans get excited about it and take it as though it's gospel when the people aren't ever around the team. McMahon's different. He's really good. So that's important to notice on this. So the concept is, what is up with the Utah Jazz is kind of back again. But why are people asking that question? Well, there's a few reasons. So one is the Jazz have $35.4 million of cap space right now. And the Detroit Pistons have, I think, 10, and that's it. So the only teams in the NBA left with cap space are the Jazz and the Pistons. The second one that's really interesting about the Jazz is that they are below the salary floor. They are the only team in the NBA right now that is below the salary floor at $21 million under the salary floor. We have to spend $21 million by opening night. Okay, well, that seems to be that you would sign Lauri Markkanen, right? That seems to be the easy answer there, is you do the extension for Lauri Markkanen. So what are the Jazz up to? And the reason why there's even more question of what the Jazz are up to is the Jazz have done some other things that are a little interesting. They have not signed any of their draft picks yet. They have not announced the signing of Drew Eubanks yet. They have not announced a signing of Johnny Juzang yet. Those have all been reported, but none of them have been announced officially by the team, which means the Jazz are keeping their powder dry and keeping their cap space available. And the only reason you would do that, if I understand cap dynamics, is maybe there's a moment here where you suddenly would be back over the cap, and at which point then you would sign those players into that as an over the cap team rather than under the cap team. So the Jazz have $35.4 million of cap space. And they're leaving their powder dry. If they are to extend Lauri Markkanen on the 6th of August, $24 million, up to $24 million of that $35 million could go to Lauri. Now, when this all started, I would have told you that I thought the Jazz would be able to do Lauri in less than $24 million upgrade. That doesn't feel that way right now. Like, when you look at the Domantas Sabonis extension that I thought was the kind of model here, and I thought that Sabonis might get a little bit more than Lauri. He went to $30.6 million, not to $40. So they gave Sabonis an extra 8.6 to get him to $31 million, and then extended him for 4 years off of that. The Jazz 24 gets Lauri to 40. And maybe in this market, that's what Lauri gets. I never thought Lauri would go to 40. But maybe now, with all the talk and everything else, and just where the market is, he does. But I think there's a chance he doesn't go to 40. It doesn't feel like he's quite. Seems like there's a fair negotiation to be had when he's not at 40. And then the Jazz haven't used all 24 million of that cap space. And the Jazz have somewhere 11 million is what, if they use 24 million of cap space, then the Jazz still have $11 million of other cap space. And if they don't use 24, you can start doing the math, right? If they use 20, then they have 15, etc. What are they doing with that? Why are they keeping their powder dry? What is it that they want to do with that? We'll discuss that, plus a few other notes on the extension and whether or not the Jazz would really say to Lauri, and I'll explain why they would do this, you have to sign this today. Next, as we continue on this edition of Locked on Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. The Chevy truck is Americana. The Silverado, the Colorado, those are the two Chevy trucks, and there's nothing like a Chevy truck. As Chevy's made with a unique form, and the Silverado truck sets you up top, makes you feel like you're sitting in a lazy boy with all the power and all the juice that you could possibly imagine. The Colorado's the zippier of the two, gets you a little smaller, more manageable, gets you around. It's the family truck that takes care of all your duties. It's fabulous. The SUV lineup, top to bottom as well. The Tahoe, the Suburban, you know the Utah County assault vehicle as well. From the Trax to the Equinox, all at Murdoch Chevy. So if you're going to stop by Woods Cross, you're going to stop by Logan, email me first at dlock09@gmail.com, and let's get you the VIP experience over at Murdoch Chevy that you deserve as an everyday Locked on Jazz listener. It's the Murdochs, 80-plus years in Utah. It's Chevy. It's everything you can imagine from Americana, and it's all at Murdoch Chevy. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, it is that time of season for you to go out and head to a ball game, go to a concert, and use Game Time to get there. Why would you use Game Time? Because Game Time is the lowest price guaranteed. They'll credit you 110% of the difference. They give you seat views, a panoramic view of every seat. All in pricing. Toggle that feature on, the total up front, no surprise fees at checkout. Zone deals and last-minute flash deals, saving up to 60% buying last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, or theater. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, whether it's MLB tickets or whether it's a WNBA game or whether it's a concert. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for just over for $20 on your first purchase. Not just over, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem Locked On NBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps as well as on YouTube. Thanks so much for tuning in. Your second listen today, make sure you grab Locked on NBA. They're not going anywhere every day. 30 minutes, latest on the NBA, all the latest rumors, a lot of Jazz talk right now. So let's get into it. All right. One of the big conversations on one of these shows was whether the Jazz would sit there and say to Lauri Markkanen, here's your contract offer on August 6th. But you have to take it today so that we can trade you at the trade deadline. So if you haven't followed the story, which is fine, there's a lot going on in the world, and you might have missed an edition of Locked on Jazz or two, and I appreciate you being here today. If the way the league rules, if you sign someone on an extension, you cannot trade them for 6 months. Interestingly enough, just coincidentally, the trade deadline's up a little bit this next year, and it's February 6th is the final day of the trade deadline. Which means that if the Jazz sign Lauri Markkanen on August 7th, he's not eligible to be traded until the offseason. Few thoughts on this. One, it does hamstring the Jazz slightly, but if you really just want to play trade value, I have to say that I do think, and I'm not saying that this is what the Jazz should do, and I apologize to Lauri and his family for the fact that he has to just be dragged through all these conversations. I do actually think Lauri's highest trade value is the summer of 2025. So right now, Lowry's trade value is predicated on him being a free agent at the end of the year and him re-signing, and you got to get a guarantee for him to re-sign. The trade value for Lauri at the deadline is you're integrating him into a system. He's a pretty important player. You're going to have to move a lot of money for him. It's not the easiest thing to make that type of trade at the trade deadline. You can do it, but it's not that easy. We get to July of next year. Everyone gets another set of picks available. You have more roster flexibility. You can move more pieces in a short period of time. That's probably the peak of Lowry's trade availability. So I don't see the scenario on a human element, on a business element, on a partnership element, where the Jazz, it was suggested by Brian Winters and Tim Bontemps that the Jazz would basically almost make two offers, suggested, I think is the best way to say that, two offers to Lauri. One is, hey, here's your offer if you sign on this day, and if you let it lapse for a day or two and we can't trade you, then this is a different offer because you're not as valuable to us. Accurate analysis in some sense by Windhorst and Bontemps. I just can't see the human element of that taking place. And I might be dead wrong on this, but I just can't see the Jazz looking at Lauri, saying that to his agent and him, and basically saying, hey, your real value to us is us trading you in February of this year. And oh, by the way, please come bust your ass for us and not worry about getting hurt. Like, I think that's, I think the way to say it is like, hey, here's 20 plus million. Here's your 40. You're super important to us. I know these are tough days. This hasn't been great. We're trying to build something, and you're the key piece to building it. And we're building this thing around you, and we're going to try to get someone who's probably better than you and as good as you, and then we're going to get going. And we want you to be a part of it. Not, hey, here's 24 million or 20 million, and by the way, for that 20 million, the price you get is that you have to be on edge and we could trade you on the last day of the trade deadline. Maybe I'm too soft, and Danny's certainly not soft on any of these things. And maybe agents and players all understand that that's the business. And so they're totally fine with it. But it does feel to me as though there's an element of that just doesn't match the human element. And I don't want to overstate it, but boy, it would take a lot of, let me just phrase it this way. It would take a lot of understanding on everyone's part for that not to be damaging. And so to me, it seems very unlikely that the Jazz are going to say to Lauri, here's your offer. You only have 12 hours to take it, because we need to make sure you're trade eligible this deadline. And furthermore, I do feel as though if you're just talking trade value, Lauri's peak trade value is off-season 2025. And I might argue that the benefit of knowing you have Lauri for the year, all the team players knowing Lauri's on the team for the year, we're in a funky spot as an organization, team building, player involvement, player engagement with everything that's going on. And I think there's a chance that by just having everyone knowing, okay, Lauri's here all year, no matter who else might not be. There's going to be Jordan Clarkson and John Collins and probably Colin Sexton talk all year. If we can eliminate, we're not talking about Lauri. Lauri's the guy. He's leading the way. He's the man. Build off him. I do think there's some value. Frankly, the other one I would say, and I've just this is how I feel about Isaac Okoro too, and why I'm interested in us trying to sign him, and maybe that's why we're keeping our cap dry, is I just watched Keontae last year without Lauri or without Jordan Clarkson and just thought it was too much. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it does feel to me as though what you're asking a young player to do when they go out there, see the Houston Rockets for a few years with just no support around them at all. The structure falls apart. They're fish so far out of water. They're desperately gasping for air the whole time. They're just trying to stay alive, that there's a huge value to having someone of quality on your roster. That's why the reason I want Isaac Okoro is not because I think he's going to win us more games, but because on opening night against Minnesota, I don't know, that's who we're playing. We're certainly not playing Minnesota on opening night because they're a high profile team now. But he's guarding Anthony Edwards. Who's guarding Anthony Edwards on our roster right now? Like, if our starting lineup right now is Keontae George, Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, Taylor Hendricks, and question mark at center, are we really putting Taylor Hendricks on Anthony Edwards? Or are we putting Colin Sexton or Keontae George on Anthony Edwards? Gosh, I mean, and then night 2, we go play the Clippers, and someone's got to guard Kawhi. And night 3, we go to KC, and someone's got to guard Shea and Jalen. And night 4, we go to not even a particularly good team in, like, I don't know, Houston, and someone's got to guard Jalen Green. And that's my I want Isaac Okoro routine, is because I just think it allows Keontae and Taylor and everybody else, Cody and Isaiah, if he's playing, to make inroads and get better. And it lessens the burden. So who knows? All right, final notes on all this. There was just so many notes on what was said. Let me make sure I've got them all covered. The big one is we have $35.4 million of cap space. The other news note, I missed that, was the Jazz are telling everyone who is trying to make trades into the Jazz cap space that their cap space is not available right now. That was the other big news note of the weekend. So the Jazz are really keeping this cap space powder dry right now, which means either they plan on re-signing Lauri and they may plan on having another move. If you're keeping the cap space dry, you're either doing it for a player that you plan to sign, or you're doing it to facilitate another trade you know might be available after you sign Lauri. Or you're going to do it to facilitate a trade to get somebody out of the second apron and you know that someone's willing to give you a bunch of draft picks for that. But the big news notes of the weekend where the Jazz have got nowhere close to what the Jazz want. Jake Fisher saying the Jazz prioritize re-signing Markkanen. And the word that the Jazz are telling teams that their cap space is not currently available. Those were the 3 biggest kind of news stories that came out of all the Jazz conversation. The other is we have 2 roster spots that are open right now. By releasing Darius Bazley and Kenny Lofton, we have 2 roster spots. So we haven't signed our draft picks. We have 2 roster spots open. We have $35.4 million of cap space. We're telling teams our cap space is not available. And we got a first chance we can offer Lauri Markkanen is on the 6th of August. How to make late July to August exciting in the NBA by the Utah Jazz. Adam Silver with a bunch of nice comments about the Smiths. We'll touch on that. An Eric Pincus trade possibility that somehow Danny Ainge has made me think is not a good idea. How's that possible? It's all next as we continue on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. It is your team every day. When you tune in, you know you're getting Jazz. You might flip on to other things. You never know what you're going to get. When you come here, you know you're getting Jazz each and every time. So thank you very much for tuning in to Locked on Jazz. All right. I just teased 2 things. The Smiths, Silver's on Smith. I thought this was interesting. Deseret News did a piece with Adam Silver talking about Ryan Smith, called him an innovator and a futurist who understands the future of marketing. Very true. I thought the most interesting comment that was made was the compliment given to the Jazz staff about the speed by which the Jazz function. And I have to say, as someone who's in the organization but not working nearly as hard as anybody else in the organization, I cannot back that up and admire more what our organization does and how quickly they move and the effort that everyone puts in and what they do. It's pretty incredible. It's really, really, really incredible. And that is Ryan Smith. That is Ryan creating a absolutely 100% creating an environment in which he gets things done, and then your job is to figure out how you're going to deal with it. All right, Eric Pincus, who's really, really good, Bleacher Report cap guy, presented a trade, a 3-way deal between the Warriors, the Kings, and the Jazz. And the Jazz get out of the deal current players that would help them: Moses Moody, Kayvon Looney, maybe, but maybe not. It would actually be, we'd have Walker, John, and so it'd be a problem. Kevin Herter, who I actually kind of like. I do like a lot, actually. Colby Jones, Kings, kind of G League player, but somewhat okay. So really not much. Okay. So the players are Moody and Herter. You can, two rotation players. You can decide similar position. The Jazz would get a 2025 first rounder via the Warriors, which to me is not that valuable because you just gave them Lauri Markkanen. A second rounder, which is not valuable. A 2027 first round swap via the Warriors, top 5 protection, or else a second rounder. Okay. If we trade Lauri Markkanen, I don't think we're going to be very great by 2027. So I'm not sure I see the value of that. 2028 first rounder for the Kings and a 2030 first round pick swap. The Warriors get Lowry. The Kings get Kuminga. Now, either one of two things has happened here. Either Danny Ainge has convinced us and created a market where we suddenly believe that you're going to get the world for these players, and I'm crazy. And I really like Eric Pincus, by the way. I just want to say that, I think he's really, really good. And I just don't think this is enough. Moody's a rotation player. Herter's a rotation player. The 2025 first round pick from the Warriors next year would if they have Lauri Markkanen, it's probably mid-20s. I don't think the pick swap in 2027 comes to fruition. The 2028 first rounder for the Kings might be interesting. And maybe the 2030 first round pick swap feels like not quite enough. So that's my thought on that. But I think it's an interesting note to that's where the trade market has gone, to the point where now all of a sudden I don't think that's a worth it trade. It's kind of a tip of the hat to the Jazz for creating a market where we suddenly think that's true. I haven't had a chance to comment. It's not a big deal because it's the end of a roster, but the Jazz released Darius Bazley and Kenny Lofton Jr. So on Kenny Lofton Jr., he's a delightful player. He's super fun. He's trying really hard. He plays with a great joy and zest. He's really talented. But as I talked about in the Summer League, the things he was doing in Summer League, you watch and you're like, okay, if he's doing that for our NBA team, we're in a lot of trouble. Now, they may re-sign him and bring him back around in some sort of G League something or other. And there may be a day where Kenny Lofton gets his find in a rotation. He's just not quite sized right. He's probably an undersized center. He's so skilled. And it's delightful to watch him, but it just doesn't seem to line up. Bazley, to me, is really interesting. Former 23rd pick of the draft, who's had a lot of NBA experience, had 118 starts. I really loved his Summer League because what I saw was a guy who was playing exactly how he'd play in the NBA. Cutting, slashing, rebounding, playing off of other players. The only problem is he just still can't shoot. He just hasn't been able to shoot it. And he's at 31% in his career. He now is not getting very many shots, right? His 2023, he only got 45. And last year, he only played 9 games, so then 8. So then you go back. But his last time he really launched it out there, he's 29% his last 2 years of 3. And really, we've talked about this a lot on this show. It doesn't seem to be that changes a great deal for players. And you've got to be able to shoot. It's too bad because I really like every other aspect of his game. But frankly, that's what you're banking on if you keep Darius Bazley, is that he's going to be suddenly able to shoot. And this has kind of been my point throughout the whole year. And we're going to this last draft we had, and I'm kind of, have my on the line on a bunch of this stuff where I no longer have the data that shows me and makes me believe that if you don't shoot early, that you shoot later. It does. I know it's like this story that everyone wants to tell, but I'm not entirely sure that it's that true. So anyway, that's kind of my my take on that. Team USA looked really, really good the other day. It is pretty crazy that the Jason Tatum didn't play, and that Tyrese Halliburton didn't play, but that team is pretty loaded. It's got to be quite a job for Steve Kerr to figure out how to manage all these things, and we'll see how he does it. All right. By the way, if you didn't catch that, U.S. crushed Serbia while Jokic was on the floor. The game was even. When Jokic was off the floor, it was like minus 20. It was crazy. Jokic is incredible. All right. Tomorrow on the show, do you have to pick a plan? Do you have to pick a lane? Zach Lowe said the Jazz need to pick a lane. Is that true? And Taylor Hendricks this week. I've done all these research about Keontae George, and if his rookie year is that number, what does it mean for success? And it gets a little daunting. What about Taylor Hendricks? If you play as little as he did his rookie year, does that become daunting? We'll talk about it as we continue this week on Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, we're going to send you the first ever national 24/7 sports channel, Locked On Sports Today. If you're on audio, check out the Big Six in 60.